Joel 3, verse 1. For behold, in those days, and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations. Now you know where we're going here. This is Armageddon. It has to be. In Zechariah 14:14, he says this, And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold and silver and apparel in great abundance. This is a weird thing. This is the way that the ancients did battle, and it seems like they're going to do it again. They would bring their treasures with them to the battlefield, and they would pillage along the way as they got there. They would. And some of them, you find that the Mongolians ended up in trouble because they got bogged down by their treasures, trying to get their treasures back. And then they got, ambushed. In Zephaniah 3, verse 8, it says, Therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. That is, that's like a vulture aiming at a target, the prey. And he's saying these nations are his prey. He's been waiting for a chance to grab them. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms to pour, I'm going to fix my page, to pour upon them mine indignation. It's bad enough that we've seen his wrath in little bits and pieces, increments here and there. But here he's saying, I've saved up some wrath and some indignation, and I want to pour it out on these people. This is 6,000 years of trying to tuck his anger away. And he says, I've already planned it. I'm not blowing my top and, just flying off at the handle. I've already planned it. When I blow up, it's going to be at this point right here, and here's what it's going to take care of. It's bad news. That I may assemble the kingdoms to pour upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger. For all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. He's jealous. Okay, Joel chapter 3, verse 2. I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people, and for my heritage Israel, whom I have scattered among the nations. Now he says he's going to plead for them. We don't understand that. We think it sounds like he's begging. That's not the way he means plead. He means plead like an attorney would in court. He's pleading your cause. He's giving evidence. And if it's a good attorney, he better not be doing it defensively. He better do it offensively. And that's exactly how God's going to do it. Look at Joel 3, verse 12. Let the heathen be weakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the round about. So much for pleading. He's not begging. He's in control. He's the one doing the judging. Isaiah 66:16. Here's how he does it. Isaiah 66:16. For by fire and by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh. I've never seen anybody plead that way. He said, I've got two instruments that help me plead. Fire and the sword. And the slain of the Lord shall be many. Ezekiel 38:22. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, a great hailstone, fire and brimstone. Whew. When he says plead, it means something different than a man would plead. In Zechariah 12, verse 3. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. That is, they've offended and been able to pick on, everybody picks on the weak man. Well, the weakling of the nations has been Israel. And everybody's been picking on Israel. And he says, we're going to turn that around. And now all of a sudden they're going to be the burden to the world because I'm on their side and we're going to go destroy everybody else. The burdensome stone for all people. And all that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all people of the earth gather together against it. He said, you can go ahead and get you in a little gang, They have these gangs that get together. A gang never appealed to me. I'm just different. I don't know. But I guess that's something that kids think is cool. There's a program on the PCC channel, the Sugar Creek Gang, and they're so whiny, little kid stories that I have to make fun of it. I say that was their precursor, and they evolved into MS-13. But that's what those bullies are. It's a bunch of bullies is what a gang is. They're not independent enough to go do anything on their own, so they got to get together in a group. And that's what these nations are going to do. And God says, I'm going to use their natural instinct against them. They think they can get together to be powerful. And what's going to happen is they're going to get together, and then I'll have them all in one spot and just smash them. Revelation 11. Revelation 11, verse 18. Here it is happening. Revelation 11:18. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroyed the earth. You know how they destroyed the earth? They didn't. God did. He sent pestilence. He consumed it with fire and with the sword. God's the one responsible for that. But he says, they caused me to do it, so I'm laying the blame on them. Tough stuff. Look at chapter 16, Revelation 16:6. Revelation 16:6. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given blood to drink, for they are worthy. That's what they earned. This is fair. Now, we've got to realize that. People want God to be fair, and he is fair. But his timetable doesn't necessarily jive with ours many times. He is fair. Right always will prevail, but maybe not in my lifetime. And I might not get to see it. But we can count on it. We've got the history of everything that's ever been that's worth knowing about, and the history of everything that will be that we need to know about, and we know who prevails. So we can just count on it. Right will prevail. Whether I get to see it or not, it's a different story. And don't get bitter about not being able to see it. Back to our verse, Joel 3, verse 2. Joel 3, verse 2. I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom I have scattered among the nations. That's God who scattered them. And parted my land. Uh-oh, they parted his land? Okay, don't touch his land. He's particular about that. That's asking for it. Jeremiah 12, verse 14. Thus saith the Lord again, all mine evil neighbors. I think we've covered this verse before, but what he's saying there is, I live in Israel. I have neighbors, and they're evil. Oh. He calls it his land so many times you can't miss it. And he says he's got neighbors. There must be some presence of God there. Now, I'm not saying it's some spooky thing that you go over there and you... No, that's a particular spot he enjoys. He says, all mine evil neighbors that touch the inheritance which I caused my people Israel to inherit. Behold, I will pluck them out of their land and pluck out the house of Judah from among them. He said, you came in and you captured Judah and you took it away captive, and then they spread it out amongst different nations. And he says, that's no problem for me. I'll just pull them right back out, put them back in the land I told them they could have. In Ezekiel 25:8, thus saith the Lord God, because that Moab and Seir do say, behold, the house of Judah is like unto all the heathen. That's the problem. They had become too much like the heathen. That's easy to do. There's no excuse for them. No nation had God so near, so apparent and obvious. Yet, it's almost like they become worse. Read the book of Hosea. They become worse than the heathen. I say this, a Christian is always a leader. You always are a leader. There's something special about being a Christian. Now, by that, I don't mean that it changes your personality. But something about you makes you the head of the pack just by virtue of being saved. And if you won't be the head of the pack for righteousness, you will be for wickedness. I've seen it too many times for it not to be so. Look at Daniel 11. Daniel 11, verse 39. Thus shall he do in the midst of the strongholds with a strong God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. This is the Antichrist. The God there is a lowercase. That's the Antichrist doing this. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. Talking about Israel. That's who's been dividing up his land. In the end, all these little peon nations, Sennacherib and who's the other one? Yeah. Well, yeah, sort of. I was thinking of Nebuchadnezzar. They've come in and they've divided up the land. They have. They've parsed it out, and the people as well. However, they're just nobodies. They're just a little show to show you what's going to be eventually. When the Antichrist comes in, he'll do it like nobody's ever done it before. And he's telling you right there in Daniel that that's his plan. His plan is to divide up the land and make money on it for gain. Zephaniah 2:8. That's why I'm leery about anybody making any deals with Israel. I know I'm gonna hit some hot spot here somewhere with somebody, I'm sure. Maybe they'll... I understand that Trump is doing what he thinks is right by making a deal and all that stuff. However, I wouldn't touch it, because you cannot make a deal like the Bible lays out the property boundaries.
That's right.
And the second you do, and you do as good, he could do 3 times as much as anybody wanted him to, and still it would be less than God's already given them. And that's kind of asking for it. You tell the property owner he only gets to give away this much, I wouldn't do that. Zephaniah 2, verse 8. I've heard the reproach of Moab, the ravelings of the children of Ammon, whereby they have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. It's a property boundary, their border. He's worried about boundaries. Even in Proverbs, you're told not to mess with the boundaries. God's concerned about land. And that never really struck me until I've gotten older. But that's what all the fighting's about over in the Middle East, is boundaries. Who owns what? And, you would think there's plenty of it over there. I guess there's not much of it that produces anything but oil. But if you look at Iraq is big. Split that thing up. Let all the Arabs go over there. If you made an Arab bloc of Iraq, Iran, even India is mostly going that direction now, Muslim. You could just make a whole block there and they could all have plenty of land, but that wouldn't be enough. They got to fight over Israel. And if you look at it in comparison, Israel's a tiny little strip. And they've got these big blocks of land. Why are they worried about that? It's the Bible right here. There's a boundary that God said nobody can touch. So the devil says, go get it. Go touch it. You can put 1 foot over. Okay, let's go back to our passage. Joel 3, verse 3. Joel 3, verse 3. Now he gets into how wicked people have come against Israel. This is true. They always have. Historically, the Jew has been mistreated by all nations. Not because he's godly, because he's not right now. You've got to forsake Judaism to become godly right now. But there's a promise that God has to fulfill, and the devil cannot stand the fact that God's promised something. He wants to break that. And so the whole world has come against Israel. And he's going to list some of the ways in verse 3. And they have cast lots for my people. That is, they are buying them. And have given a boy for an harlot, and sold a girl for wine, that they might drink. That's bad news. So, you know how God's going to judge the nations? He says, I'm going to gather the nations together, and I'm going to plead with them. And I've got a sword, fire, pestilence, hail, blood, all these things that he's going to use. But he's going to judge them. The criteria he's judging by is how they treated Israel. That's why it's very important you never vote for somebody who claims to be against Israel. God's already promised, I'll bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. That promise still holds. Matthew chapter 25. Here's when he does this judgment. This is a special judgment. This is not an individual's judgment. It's a nation's judgment. And there's a lot of things about these nations that'll go out into the millennium and eternity that I don't know. I don't know how many nations there'll be. I mean, I know there's going to be 12. I don't know what 12 they are. Maybe he's going to make up some new ones. I don't know. When he gets through with this judgment, I can't imagine there'd be many nations left because they've all mistreated Israel. He may just have a handful of people over here and a handful of people over here, mix them back up and make some new nations. I don't know. Matthew 25, verse 32. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from the other, as the shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto, Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in, naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? Yes, you would have to be righteous to say that. I would say, yeah, oh, I don't remember that, but yes, sir, if you say, yeah, I'm on your team. I've always been on that team. No, they were righteous enough to say, I really don't remember doing that. So they are the righteous. When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee, or saw thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren. Who's his brethren? It's not Christians. His brethren is Israel. You've done it unto me. Then shall he say unto them on the left, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was an hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. So forth, so on. This is how he judges the nations. That, of course, comes after Armageddon. The first thing he wants to do is have a little fun with the nations. He's already told us what he considers fun. I'm going to gather them up. I've already determined. I'm going to get them all together in one spot, and I'm going to squash them. And then the few that remain, I'm going to pull them out, and I'm going to sit down on the throne, and we're going to have a little come to Jesus meeting. I mean, literally. And he's going to judge those nations based on how they treated Israel. Joel chapter 3, verse 4. Joel 3, verse 4. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if you recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head? Whew. Okay, that's exactly what they've done, is they've done Israel malice over the years, and they've taken away slaves of his people, put them in slavery. Egypt, Alexander, Artaxerxes, one after the other, a nation has come in and taken slaves of his people. And he says, there's a recompense coming, and I'm going to flip the tables and let them take you. It's going to be bad news. In essence, he's saying, it's too late at this point. You've already done it. It's already earned a reward, and I'm going to give it to you. Genesis 4, verse 12. Genesis 4, verse 12. This is a wild thing. All the way back at the beginning of the Bible, we find out how important the earth is. We know that's true. We live here. It's earth. What would we do without earth? You wouldn't make it very long. The ground is important. And God says, if you won't get along with me, I own that ground, and I won't let it work for you. Genesis 4, verse 12. And when thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. Israel, the land, is no different. Before the Balfour Declaration, Israel was a wilderness like the rest of the Middle East. It's not until Israel became the homeland of the Jews again that it began to produce again. Now it's becoming green. Now the rivers are beginning to flow again. And it was not that way when just the Arabs had it. Because God says that ground does what I tell it to. And that's going to be great in the millennium. Malachi 3, verse 6. For I am the Lord, I change not, therefore you sons of Jacob are not consumed. Really? Yeah, they get consumed left and right. But he says they're not devastated. They're not demolished. There's always going to be, here's a phrase you'll find in your Bible as you go through it, a remnant, a small handful. There's going to be many nations that disappear. Once we get into the millennium, we'll say, remember the days when there was a nation called this? America? Well, what's that? There's going to be many nations that just completely disappear. But he says Israel never will. They'll always be a nation. They'll never be consumed. Joel 3, verse 5. Joel 3, verse 5. I don't want this to sound crude, but God is materialistic. I mean, you think about it. He made all these things that we crave. Gold and silver and all that stuff. That's his. He made it. Else we wouldn't have been able to get it. And he says, look at this verse, verse 5. Because you have taken my silver and my gold and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. God's taken credit for the prosperity of the earth because it belongs to him. And if a man uses his resource in a way he does not approve of, this is what God does to him. Romans chapter 11. He says, for of him, and through him, and to him are all, A-L-L, all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. That means everything you have belongs to him. Even hot fries. I know that's not God made, but God made the man who figured out the chemicals to put together. Therefore, we had better use everything we can put our hands on for his glory, because there's going to be an accountability given one day. And these nations are going to be in hot water, only they'll be wishing for water. Acts 14. Acts 14, verse 17. It says, nevertheless, he left not himself without witness, in that he did good, and gave us rain from heaven, and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. That's the reason many times we don't see fairness prevail as quick as we think it ought to. Because God's a good God. Now, we've been seeing a whole lot of where he's going to finish things up, and there it's not going to appear there's a whole bunch of goodness left. His long suffering is over. It's no more long. Even a long rope has an end, and that will be the end. But until you get to the end, he is a very good God. The question is not, why do bad things happen to good people? That's not really the question. The question is, why do good things happen to bad people, but I just should say people? Because we're bad in comparison to Jesus Christ. Yet he still does us good. We've got a good God. Daniel chapter 5. Daniel 5 verse 23. But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, of iron, of wood, stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God, capital G, in whose hand thy breath is, whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. That's Belshazzar with the handwriting on the wall. And there he's saying, I'm taking note of the things you think you're enjoying. He was enjoying gold and silver and was doing things with it that he shouldn't have been doing. So for us, whatever you're enjoying, great. God gave us all things freely to enjoy. Okay, if it's at his pleasure. But if we're enjoying it outside of the way he intended it, it's going to be Belshazzar 2.0. And maybe not any handwriting, just a hand slapping. And one more, maybe. Hosea 2. Hosea 2 verse 8. This is Israel, and they've gone astray, and he compares them to an unfaithful wife. And Hosea 2 verse 8, he says, For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. So he's saying, she was doing wrong, and I still did her good. And when I did her good, she did more wrong with it. That's us many times. I hate to keep making this practical, but it just pops out. The fact of the matter is, we've done many times, we've done things wrong and not gotten right with God fast enough. This crowd in here gets right with God. That's good. We probably don't do it fast enough, but we do get right with God, or you wouldn't be here tonight. However, the fact of the matter is, even before we've gotten right, he's still giving us good. I'm going to tell you where it gets painful. Here's where it gets painful. It seems like the closer you get to God, the less leash he gives you, the more he requires of you. The second you do wrong, you got to get right faster every time, it seems like, or heavy hangs over your head. And then you look out and you see the heathen who never does right, that claims to be a Christian, and nothing bad ever happens to them, it doesn't look like. Well, hang on. He's doing them good for a reason. It's the goodness of God that leads us to repentance. And if it doesn't, when the axe falls, there's no remedy. Look at Joel 3 verse 6. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far away from their border. There's that land again. Land. Verse 7. Behold, I will raise them out of the place whither ye have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head. And I will sell your sons and your daughters into the land of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabaeans, unto a people far off, for the Lord hath spoken it. Whew. Now he's talking about slaves. This is a subject nobody wants to talk about. And I really don't want to talk about it either, but it's here. The Bible does not condemn slavery. I know that just freaks everybody out. It does not. Did you know there were slaves all through the Old Testament? And Israel could have slaves. Now, it's prescribed. It has to be done correctly. And you have to treat them fairly. And you don't keep them for a lifetime. It's a 7-year contract. However, it's never the Bible doesn't ever say you can't have slaves. It says you can't have them the wrong way. That's what it says. Here he's saying, when things get done, when I set up the millennium, I'm going to allow my people to have slaves of the nations that used to put them in slavery. Whew. Don't hear many people talk about that. And I don't want to talk about it very long. But that's a fact. Now, it won't be bad at that point. You can guarantee it, because righteousness will prevail. As much wickedness prevails now, the tables will turn. And the propensity will be toward righteousness, not wickedness. Wickedness will be the exception, not the rule in the millennium. So slavery will be a good thing, somebody taking care of you. And if they don't, then that's what Matthew 5 is all about. There's 3 judgments set up in the millennium. And I better stop there because we could go forever. Remind me next time we'll pick up at Joel 3 verse 9. And I'm hoping we'll finish the chapter then, and then I'll give you the other side of what's going on with the heathen, and then we'll put Bible into it. All right, that'll do it for tonight.